Hello, everyone. This is Denise from Dobby Books. I should actually say good evening. Everyone's kind of gone to bed, and I've got my quiet time in my library, which is my haven. And I wanted to respond to Robert's tag, which is entitled The Reading Books About Reading Books Tag. Thank you, Robert, for tagging me. And it's supposed to discuss books that describe the joys, pleasures, and benefits of reading, which is, of course, book nerds. It's our favorite subject, right? And I want to get started on these prompts. So the first one is, what do you enjoy the most about reading? You know, it's hard to say. And I know it seems strange, but I love what reading does for me. There's something there's we shift into something when we're reading. It's that shift. What I experience in that shift in reading mode. I'm just so hooked on that I just can't imagine my life without reading. I just love reading. I don't know. I get to learn. I get to I don't know. It's hard to explain. Except all I can think of is that point where the shift happens when I'm reading. I love that. Number two, what is the greatest benefit you get from reading? I have a very, very strong pleasure from reading. It makes me happy. Um, I remember, I don't know, I think maybe in some way I always felt like if I read, I'll learn. And I always wanted to learn, even though I didn't grow up with, with healthy study skills. I wasn't sure how to learn how to study. I always wanted to learn. And books brought me that on a level that I could um, pursue and understand. And it also attracted me or pulled me to more learning, to higher, more complicated levels of learning, if that makes any sense. If I read one book on this particular subject or this particular part of history or a particular person, I wanted to know more about such things. And some of the sources would be um, perhaps it was the writing style, perhaps it was more dense, depending on the topic. That's what reading did for me. It helped me to learn. And that is something I always had a love for, was learning. So maybe that's it. Excuse me. Number three, is there any other activity which gives you satisfaction similar to reading? Um, I've always been a contemplative kind of person. I need alone time every day. I don't care if it's in my car on those busy days, you know. But usually at home, and this depends because I don't do this all the time, but I have long stretches where I do this, and then it seems like my brain needs some time off. A period of time that some people would call your quiet time, your journaling time, and this took many forms over the years, but it did involve me having an hour to myself, because a half hour would go too fast, but an hour at least. And I would sit down and I would clear my mind, and depending wherever I was spiritually, let's say, I would have a time where I would just get myself focused and centered and grounded, and I would journal my thoughts, hopes, fears, whatever. I would just talk it through. And sometimes I would have a conversation during those journaling exercises. This is just no prompts, just me doing my thing. Um, so those ton of quiet time journaling experiences, personal conversation with God, let's say, um, that's something that I always need at some point in my life. I guess once I have a break and I start to feel that antsiness again, where I have to pull myself away again, I start doing it again for a while. And the only other thing I can think of that would also bring me pleasure, and this happened, especially early on when I was grieving, um, adult grown-up coloring books that had these all these different patterns and there are all these different themes. Boy, that was great. I'd take out all my colored pencils and just, you know, go to town. And I would just have such a wonderful, I would disappear from the world during that time. So the coloring and journaling slash quiet time combination did give me a lot of pleasure. Number 4, do you have a dedicated time each day or specific days of the week set aside for reading? Every day. I read something every day. And I normally read now in the evening. After my husband's gone to sleep, all the animals have been fed, everybody's tired and nappy, and so I have, one kitty cat, she's over here in the rocking chair, and the other ones are out there. This is usually when I read. I'd like to read earlier in the day, but I'm always just running around. Oh, I gotta get laundry done, and let me just put the dishes away, and oh, let me vacuum this, let me reorganize this, there's always something I'm doing during the day. Number 5, do you have a dedicated amount of time each day for reading? I want to take at least 2 hours in the evening. Sometimes I'm tired, I can't read that long. But if I can spend a couple of hours for my reading, I like that. That's a nice way for me to top off the day. That quiet, enjoyable, just me in here in the library by myself. Oh, I just love that. Let's see. Number 6, what is your favorite essay or book about the joys of reading? It's not just one. I have a lot of different books about reading. All right. So there's books that are about reading, like the practice of reading, the skill of reading. So your basic would be this one by Mortimer, J. Adler, and Charles VanDoren, a classic, How to Read a Book. I also have the older one, which is all marked up. This is the newer one, which is not. And this goes through the different levels of reading and the different kinds of reading that you need to do, whether you're whatever. But there's enough. I think we're all pretty much familiar with this book, but it tells you how to read anywhere from just the superficial level to going deep, really studying what you're reading level. This is excellent, by the way, people. This is something I would recommend you work your way through. And there's a booktuber. I will put her name in the description. Library Lynn. And I know I don't have the whole name, but Library Lynn. She's a woman who worked for many, many years as a librarian. And she has just these interesting videos. And she has done a video series on how to read a book. She's done the reading. She summarizes it for you and gives you some good points. She's a great source. So I'll put her link below. Another book about reading is one that Robert showed you that he had, and I also have the same book, The Intellectual Life, Its Spirit, Conditions, and Methods by A.G. Sertillanges. And I have kitty cat bites in this corner. I don't know how that happened. Oh, bad kitties. And this is really a book. A.G. Sertillanges was a Dominican priest, so he's approaching this from a very spiritual point of view. And he really talks about how the pursuit of learning is a serious task. It is a calling, and we should treat it as the special thing that it is, a calling. So he shows how to apply that in practical everyday terms. He tells you about scheduling that study of those books, and then some um, uh, uh, advice on how to go about that study and writing about it, etc. So the life of an intellectual. And I think I've read this twice now. I've marked it up a bit. I've got my little thingies. This is something that when I first got it, the person who recommended it to me, Professor Schaefer, recommended that I read this once a year. That's a good idea to kind of refresh our minds about that. And I picked this up when I was taking a couple of courses at Memorial College. It was on the classics, and this was the first course you took on simply having an intellectual life. This is what we had to read and talk about. So this is a good book. And then, as far as going along the same lines, as far as about reading, this is a book by Dr. Susan Wise Bauer. It's called The Well Educated Mind, a guide to the classical education you never had. And what she does is she shows the reader how to educate themselves through the reading of books. And she goes through the different genres: the novel, the autobiography, memoir, history, drama, poetry, and cosmic. I think she's talking about science. And what she does is, for example, if you go to the, well, I have little tabs on them, see. So when she goes to the novel, she she introduces the novel, and then she goes through a very brief history of the novel. And then after that, I want to get to that point, she goes through the 3 stages of reading a novel. And that first stage is what she refers to as the first level of inquiry, grammar stage reading. And she explains the first time you read through a novel, you should look for answers to 3 very simple questions: who are these people? What happens to them? And how are they different afterwards? Um, and then she says, as you read, you should also turn down or bookmark pages where something significant seems to be happening. Don't worry about what the significance is. You'll return to these sections later after you do your initial read through. So this is the initial read through. This is, her recommendations are reminiscent of Adler's How to Read a Book. And then she says there's your second level of reading of the novel, which is what she refers to as the logic stage reading. She says your first reading of the book should give you a sense of the story as a whole, one sweeping tale that you pursue from beginning to end without stopping to ruminate or look up details. Now you'll narrow your gaze to individual elements of the book. And then she goes into how to go about doing that. What is it you want to look for? Just simple things she draws to your attention that you can apply during that second run through the novel. And then there's the final stage of reading the novel, is what she refers to as the third level of inquiry, rhetoric stage reading. And she says your answers to the logic stage questions, which was the second level, should begin to reveal the ideas at the core of each novel. During the rhetoric stage, you'll try to decide whether you agree with those ideas or not. And again, she provides some questions, some things to consider, and then she provides a reading list of novels that you can read through, and they are listed in historical chronological order. So the first one she lists is Don Quixote by Cervantes. And the last one listed, let me see, is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And she does this with every section. With all the other genres, it has that same format. So I think this is just a wonderful source. I've enjoyed this very much. And then I have this other book. This is something that is sold to libraries. This is a book all about historical fiction. This is volume 2. I have volume 1 as well. And this is a wonderful resource It, of course, it explains the historical fiction genre itself, a brief history of it, covers some recent trends in historical fictions, the appeal to the genre, and then it breaks it down to the different kinds of historical fiction. A lot of people think it's just historical fiction, but no, there are subgenres in historical fiction. So the author starts with traditional historical novels and goes through them in historical chronological as well as geographical order. So for the traditional historical novel, they begin with prehistoric Europe, Asia, and Africa, and then they work their way through other subcategories: biblical, other ancient civilizations, the British Isles, Europe, the United States, Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and the Antipodes. And on to the next one: multi period epics. Next one: romance, sagas, Western historical novels, historical mysteries, adventures in history, historical thrillers, literary historical novels, Christian historical fiction, alternate history, historical fantasy, and then resources. And breaking them down again through geographical areas and historical chronological order. Just fantastic resources. And it will have the title of the book and the author, publisher, year of publication, number of pages, ISBN number, and then a brief little summary, one paragraph of the book itself. This is great, especially if you're someone who enjoys historical fiction or want to explore it. I got this secondhand at my library. There were 2 volumes and I got it. And at my library, I get them for, no, did I get this at the library? No, I ordered these off eBay. So I got these at a huge discount because I think these are the older books. But this, great, awesome. And then I also have other books that are ebooks. I'd forgotten I had them, of course, because I had them on my Kindle. But I also have another book that's entitled The Intellectual Life, but this one's by Philip Gilbert Hamerton. Of course, an older book, more of the for the educated, the intellectual life, not quite as the same as Sertillanges, but close. I also have the same book that Robert had called The Life of the Mind. I didn't know I had that. I looked at the book, something about it was familiar, but that was all I had. But I have this as a Kindle book. I haven't read it yet, but I know I purchased it because I wanted to. And then I have this book by Robert Gottlieb. I want to get the cover on here. Entitled Avid Reader, A Life. Robert Gottlieb worked as an editor for various publishing companies, and he's passed away. He passed away a few years ago, but it's just interesting to see how, as a child, he began to read books, and it was his escape. He was always this kind of awkward little scrawny kid, and he just talked about how books became his world and his what's the word I'm trying to find? His hiding place, his safe place. It's a lot of the different what he did at the different publishing companies. So I would kind of skip on that. I'll read a little bit and then go on towards his early life and then later on in his life. There's also another book that I found, and it's written by an author from Africa. So I have a really hard time pronouncing his name. Let's see how I do. Pathways to Becoming an Avid Reader, Job Izibokale Aluge. Pathways to Becoming an Avid Reader. And he talks about how he reads 48 books a year. He's always reading. In his case, a lot of that reading had helped him learn a lot, and he was able to become a teacher in a school he used to attend. It's an interesting journey, reading journey to read. I enjoyed that. And then there's one that's more sectarian. It was the title that caught my eye: Some people have misinterpreted this as a literal thing. It's not meant to be literal. Sometimes I get impatient about that. It's like, no, it's not literal. Anyway, here's the cover, and it's entitled How to Read Your Way to Heaven by Vicki Burbach. And it's written from a Catholic perspective, and she goes into, it has 3 parts, and she talks about the practice of spiritual reading, explaining a program that she's recommending in the book, and then she breaks it down into a 5-year reading program. And each year she provides your list of books, so they're always reading scripture, and they're always reading the Catechism of the Catholic Church. But then the 3rd category is the different spiritual reading from authors throughout Catholic history. It's a very interesting book. I thought, oh, that's really cool. So I got that one too, and I think that is the last of my ebooks on that topic. And the next ones are really fun books. This one is classic Penguin, and this is fascinating because it goes through the different types of books that Penguin Publishing produces. So we have the Penguin Galaxy series, and they have an image of one of the covers. And what it does is, as it goes through the book, it has the designer and the illustrator of the various titles, the covers, give a sort of reflection on their experience as they were doing this. And they also have the Penguin Orange collection, and it's the same format. The creative director and the illustrator will talk about their experience putting together, designing the cover of the books in the series itself. The next category are the black spines, and you can see actual covers of many of the black spines and the illustrator and director's reflections. The other kinds of books that Penguin publishes are the deluxe classics. This is a favorite of a lot of us. You see some of the covers of the deluxe classics. You read more of the reflections from the creative director and illustrators of these various classics. I'm trying to find a really cool one. Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies has an interesting cover. The next category is the drop caps. These are the books that have the big letters on them. And they go through the various covers. And the illustrators and the designers and the whole process of putting this all together. It's really neat is how they did this. Isn't this neat? So this is a fun book. This is a really fun book. I was glad I found it. It was really just entertaining. And along the same lines, Penguin has their Penguin Modern Classics, and this book is about all the modern classics that they have published thus far. So they'll give pictures of books, but also other ones that they've produced. Some are no longer published. And it goes through, I want to make sure that I tell you how it's formatted. It covers categories, geographical locations: Europe, Asia, Africa, Australasia, the Americas. And then it covers more specifically northern, eastern, southern, western, in each area, giving you, pictures of the various books that they've published. It's fascinating. It's just loaded full of all the covers and summaries, and it's just fantastic. Again, just a fun book to have. And the last one I have is, again, another Penguin book, the Penguin Classics book, a little different than the first one that I showed you. And this one is formatted the same way as the Penguin Modern Classics book. So it goes by geographic. This one is formatted in historical chronological order. So it goes the ancient world, the Middle Ages, early modern Europe, and then the industrial age. And then within that, it covers the geographical location. So within the ancient world, it starts with the Fertile Crescent, moves on to ancient India, then China, then Greece, then Rome. Middle Ages starts with Europe, classical Asia, medieval Africa. In early modern Europe, it covers Renaissance and Enlightenment, and then with the Industrial Age, it covers the various areas in Europe. So here's an example, and you have the various books when they were published, title, author, etc. And gosh, lives. The later Roman Empire. It has. This is interesting. Interesting thing. Plotinus, the Aeneads, lives of the later Caesars, Ammianus, Marcellinus, I hope I'm saying that right, Justinian, the Digest of Roman Law, Procopius, The Secret History, Michael Psellus, Anne Comnene, the Alexiad. These are all the different things that I'm reading through on that. Just fascinating. All these different books that Penguin has published. You start to realize all the different, oh gosh, just tons of books they publish. It really gives you this huge picture of Penguin as a publishing company and what they do. And last but not least, this one, Bibliophile. I had done a video, a page through on this particular book. It's really wonderful. Like, this talks about cult classics, and the covers are drawn and they look just like the real books. I just thought this was fascinating. And it goes into, you have different authors and writers talking about these books, books in general, etc. Famous libraries. This one in Mexico City, I've been to that one. I don't think I've ever been inside because I was pretty young back then. I had gone with my family. It talks about Pride and Prejudice, for example, and all the different editions that have been published. This really was a fun book. It goes through beloved bookstores, covers cookbooks. My goodness. Nature and Animals, writing room, all the different writing rooms that different authors have, and each author will talk about them. Another fun book. And this is published by who? Chronicle Books. So that was my quick, brief response to the second to the last question. I'm sure you're anxious for me to get to the end. And the last question is, no, it's second to last. What is your favorite quote about the joy of reading? I don't know who said it, but it was a person, someone else is going to know this too. He was writing to his sister. And he would spend so much money. No, that was the wrong one. I think Robert's going to know this because I think it might have been a Roman. He talked about how after he finished purchasing books or something, if he had any money left, then he would purchase something to eat. And I had to laugh about that because isn't that us? Oh my gosh. That's so true. It's a quote like that, but I apologize, I don't know it in full, but he did mention that after he purchased his books, then if there was any money left, he would get something to eat. And 8, if you were denied time to read, or if your access to books was denied you, how would you cope? You know, I've had nightmares about that. What would I do if I lost my vision? What would I do? You know, I'd have to listen to audiobooks, perhaps learn Braille, but that could be long and difficult. It's a fear of mine, you know, of losing my eyesight so I wouldn't be able to read anymore. I don't know what I would do. I'd have to obviously do something else. I don't know. Take up gardening? I mean, it's healthy. I'm out in the sun. I get fresh air. Gosh, is that like the one thing we don't want to think about as readers? Not reading, not being able to read? I probably write like crazy. Just write and write and write and write and write and work in the garden. Anything to burn off that energy and fulfill this thing about paper and words, I guess. I think that's what I would do. And I think that is the last question. Yes, it is. And I will be tagging 5 people. And I go through my list so I can, cover everybody on my list in the order. So you'll know if you've been tagged. I guess it'll show up on your messages or something. Um, it's all voluntary. If you're really curious about doing this, go ahead and do it. I'd love to see what you have to say. And again, thank you, Robert, for tagging me. I had a lot of fun looking up the books that I had about books. And everybody, take care, be healthy, have a great week. Bye bye.